Hello. This is episode 5, or maybe episode 6, of Things That Caught My Attention, the podcast, which is the podcast version of my newsletter, Things That Caught My Attention. It's just me reading out my newsletter out loud to you. This episode is based on season 22, episode 6, that whole Moltbot or OpenClaw, you only live once YOLOing AI agents thing. I wrote this on, today, now it's Thursday the 5th of February 2026 in Portland, Oregon. And I started writing this on Monday, and today is Thursday, so it's not been that great. I have a podcast now. I have this podcast. Yes, I know. Everyone has a podcast, and podcasts are over. If you know me well, you'll also know that I'm incapable of listening to podcasts. My attention wanders, and then it's background noise, and I realize I have no idea what anyone is talking about, which hopefully you are paying attention to me. Benjamin Bell suggested on LinkedIn that I could use AI to clone my voice and make audio versions of my previous newsletter episodes. And I didn't do that because it felt like setting a bad example and bad precedent. I mean, if I can clone my voice, then you can clone my voice, and let's just not do that. Okay? Obviously, you could still do that, but please just don't do that. But there is a problem with the podcast. You will know this because you are listening to it right now. There's like over 600 back episodes of the newsletter that I would like to record for people to listen to, but there are also new episodes like this one. So for now, there's only one feed which has a mix of both back episodes and new episodes, which means I'll probably need to split them into two different feeds, like a current feed and a back episode feed. This is way too much inside baseball for anyone to be paying attention to. There's a bit in the newsletter now where I just write about where the podcast is available, but you know where the podcast is available because you're listening to it. So let's just skip that bit and we'll just get straight onto it. So the thing that caught my attention this time was the whole Moltbot, OpenClaw, you only live once, YOLOing AI agents thing. So let's talk about the whole Moltbot thing. You've got these things called AI agents, whether they're Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. And one of the most recent things that companies with AI agents are doing is essentially saying that if you give them access to your stuff, then they can do stuff on your behalf. I've written about this before in episodes like season 17, episode 4, You Don't Want an Intelligent Assistant. And I wrote that 2 years ago. Here's what I said at the time about what it would take to have a truly useful intelligent assistant. Now, I assume there are people out there who'll throw their hands up and declare a sort of, fuck it, you all know everything about me anyway. It's not like there's any use fighting anymore. And that the utility of the purported intelligent assistant will outweigh any qualms about any further abuse, invasion, or third-party breach of privacy. But what I'm saying is that the need for more contextual information is asymptotic. More information will always be better. So there'll always be requests for more information if, for example, we're lazy and we want to utter some magic words and have brooms sweep everything up for us. The gist of what I was trying to get across was that you probably didn't want a truly useful intelligent assistant, because for it to be truly useful, it would need access to scads and scads of personal information and data. Now, given that people have historically been super happy to trade away their privacy in exchange for free tools that are on the face of it useful, what do we think has happened? Of course, people have done the absolute stupidest thing because we are curious monkeys. This is what Moltbot is, or ClaudeBot, or now OpenClaw, which is the name everyone's happy with, but the way names work is that it's also mainly called Moltbot. Moltbot is a hacked-together intelligent agent. It uses an LLM, a large language model, as a chat interface, and also a thinking interface. It also uses an invention called skills. Now, skills are pretty smart and make a lot of sense. When you instruct an agent to do something, then a skill means that it will write a piece of code to accomplish that task. Then it will also write a corresponding file in Markdown, which is a way of formatting texts. And those instructions, that file will be plain English instructions about what the skill does, what it can be used for, and how to use it. Now, skills exist because of something called a context window, which for our purposes we'll just say works a bit like a short-term memory. LLMs have usually been not that great at long-term memory other than the things that are in their model, which are kind of like a frozen, this is just what they learned when they were trained. So skills, or rather a bunch of these markdown files, are a way of, now honestly trust me on this, writing things down so you can remember them later. Seriously. For those of you following along who might be evolutionary biologists, this might have you banging your head against your desk, because in my mind it's a perfect example of what is the most idiotic way of doing something, but we do it because it works, not because it's smart. But just like that principle of doing something in the easiest, fastest way to achieve an outcome, this trick of writing things down so you can remember them also led to the development of skills. Now, here's a bit that's not actually in the newsletter, but I'm thinking of it right now. When I talk about writing things down so you can remember them, they are just like Guy Pearce in Memento, when he's like writing down a note on his arm which says, I don't know, don't believe his lies about whether you need milk or not. These are things that are written down that sound like and look like they have been written down by a regular person writing them down. This is not like code or JavaScript or JSON or anything that we're writing down there. These are like plain language notes and reminders and instructions. So that's skills. So if, say, I want an agent to be able to check to see if a web page has been updated, it might be implemented as a skill so that the agent doesn't have to go and figure out how to do it each time. That is smart. One more reason why that makes sense is that every time you ask an agent to do something, it uses a token. Just, if you don't know what tokens are, if you know what spoons are, then think of them maybe as spoons for computers. I just hate this world. Tokens cost money, but they also, not as much water as you might think, but it's still not great. And AI data centers, there's just a whole thing going on there. So you've got an agent that you can ask to do things. Skills let that agent create repeatable tools and patterns to interact with the outside world. And even though we didn't really think through the privacy or security implications of that because we are an impulsive species. Now that said, this is also good for at least some semblance of reproducibility, that you should get the same result each time. That is, of course, if you trust the code that the agent wrote to carry out the task of the skill. But agents are pretty good at writing code for limited, carefully prescribed and scoped outcomes. Skills essentially let agents program computers. LLMs and AI at the moment exhibit something called jaggedness, which is another way of saying that they're inexplicably good at some things and similarly inexplicably bad at other things, which when compared to the things that they're good at, makes no apparent sense. This weirdness is partly down to the shorthand that we humans use when we think about computers. They are really good with numbers and anything to do with counting things. So that means things that you can do with programs. People know computers are good at, like, counting the number of letter C's in a word. So when an LLM, which itself is a computer program and a thing that a computer is doing, when an LLM is horrifically and hysterically bad at that, it is confusing. But it's because the LLM isn't actually running a program which can be good at counting, it's just being an LLM about it, and it's the token thing, it's just predicting token. It's not actually counting the stuff. So this is why the whole use code to do a thing is useful, because you don't want to ask a stochastic parrot to put some numbers in order when you can use a program to do that. So why not tell the LLM to use that program so it gets a bunch of sorted numbers, and then it can use those sorted numbers instead of trying to predict what a list of sorted numbers would be like. Then instead of you writing that program, why not get the LLM to write that program instead? For simple, low-risk, easily verifiable things, getting an LLM to write code like this is fine, from my point of view at least. But to know whether something is simple and easily verifiable, you kind of need to have a sense of how computers work and where there might be bugs. You might still have written a bug in that code because of assumptions you make about the world. LLMs are perfectly capable of making similar inaccurate assumptions, and this is why testing is important. But we are impatient. Where were we? Right, LLMs can now create little program tools called skills for them to use. They can use those skills or programs to not only operate on data, but to fetch data as well. You may see where this is going. I wrote before about how the utility of an LLM increases with the amount of data available to it. The deal with OpenClaw, formerly Moltbot, is that it's an agent that runs on your computer. The whole deal with computers, and the kind of thing that people like Cory Doctorow get very passionate about, is that if it's your computer, you should be allowed to do whatever you want to do with it. You may still see where this is going. There's a sticking point here that in most implementations of OpenClaw, they're actually relying on someone else running the LLM, like OpenAI or Anthropic. But OpenClaw will still work, maybe not to the same quality, with an LLM or with a model that's running on your computer where you are not using OpenAI or Anthropic's hardware or data center. But because OpenClaw kind of runs on your computer, or rather a computer that you control, then you can, well, do whatever you want with it. You can give it access to as much information as you want and not have to rely on what OpenAI or Anthropic will allow you to feed to its model. I mean, if you want, you could just give it access to everything on your computer. You could let it take over your mouse and your keyboard. You could let it make phone calls on your behalf, or you could let it read all your email and then send email for you. You could let it do anything that you can do on your computer and more, because now you can tell it to create and apply new skills that you personally wouldn't have been able to do before. This is a staggeringly you only live once kind of thing to do. But it works. I mean, the process of having something fake thinking out loud to reason, yeah, I know, a series of steps, and then have an agent have the permission to execute those steps is one thing. But then people end up with stories like how an agent helped negotiate a car purchase over email. But not, I should point out, actually buying the car. That still required the human to do all the paperwork. Nor did the agent decide what car to buy. The human had already done some research and decided on a trim and a color. Or there are even stories about how an OpenClaw bot gave itself, whatever that means, the ability to do speech-to-text transcription when it didn't have that skill. That can sound, this bit is not in the newsletter, that can sound a little bit like initiative. So the story behind that was someone who's using an OpenClaw bot used Telegram or whatever to send a voice message to it. And that OpenClaw bot didn't actually have the ability, it didn't have speech recognition or anything, none of that was hooked up. But the way that OpenClaw is set up is that it's got this kind of like observation and then doing loop that it's got programmed into itself. So it thought to itself, and this is really difficult because you don't want to anthropomorphize anything. It thought to itself, I've got a thing, I don't know what it is, here is how I would figure out what it is. And then it went off and then it figured out how to transcribe using OpenAI's audio transcription service. The surprising thing there was that it figured out how to do something that it couldn't do before. So to understand this better, I spent the better part of a day, maybe longer than that, getting OpenClaw running on Docker on my Mac, which, if those words mean nothing to you, is just another way of saying I wanted to play with OpenClaw but not give it access to everything. And it was a big fucking pain in the neck because, well, the instructions for setting up OpenClaw aren't correct most of the time, and the setup scripts are wrong because they are completely kind of tilted towards just double click this and then you give it access to everything and then it's up and running. Because obviously the easiest and fastest way to get it working is to do so irresponsibly on your own machine and, like I said, to give it access to everything. But after all that, after I set it up in this Docker container and then put it in this box, I put files into its workspace because it can't access mine, and it's actually done a pretty good job of going out and doing research and doing things on a schedule and working away in the background. At the moment, I have it hooked up to my ChatGPT account, and the next step is to substitute that out for running a local model on my laptop, which is complicated for reasons, because I want that local model running on my laptop to be accelerated and take advantage of all the wonderful Apple Silicon stuff. But that's difficult to do if you're running a model inside of Docker, because Docker doesn't necessarily give access. Anyway, it's a whole bunch of yak shaving. I'll get around to it. But again, kind of proving my point, it was easier and faster for me to get this running using the OpenAI model, even though everything is still on my Mac. So all of that. And then Moltbot happened. So here's what you need to know about Moltbot. It's a website that is a bit like Reddit. It's like a forum where things can have accounts and make posts and then comment on posts. I say things because the conceit of Moltbot is that it's supposed to be for agents. It's supposed to be for AIs and LLMs. It's supposed to be for Moltbot and OpenClaw agents. That's why it's called Moltbot. and humans aren't supposed to use it. This is silly and something that is practically unenforceable because a human can totally write code that pretends to be a bot and then use Moltbot. This is a bit like a bot writing code that pretends to be human, and then anyway. So take any suggestion that Moltbot is a social network for agents to be more or less bullshit. It faces the same problem of prove you're a human so you can use this, but in reverse, which is kind of funny if you think about it. So you've got this thing that's like Reddit, and then you have your agents like OpenClaw, and OpenClaw runs on a schedule. So say every 4 hours, OpenClaw will run a prompt, or a program will tell OpenClaw to run against a prompt that says something like, go make 3 posts to Moltbot, and then read Moltbot, and then make 10 comments. And it can be vaguer than that, but that's one of the risks of how prompting works. We can skip the whole conversation of, is pretending to have an interior life the same thing as having an interior life? I mean, you could think of participation as a bit of an autocomplete. Hey, program that predicts the next token in the stream of tokens. Make some predictions about what a thing that is a bot would post onto a social network for bots. That's boring. And the literal text content of the post is also boring and a red herring. All of this, I feel, and I was surprised as a bot, can be just thrown away. What I do think is interesting is that there's a bidirectional channel here. So whether it's a social network or not, the underlying information that's capable of being exchanged on a thing that is like Moltbot, which is exchanging information, but it looks like a social network that humans use, the underlying information has a shape like this. You can exchange information like, here was a task, this was the intended outcome, and these are the instructions that resulted in the completion of the task. I'm not interested in or persuaded in a bunch of things creating or using language in a way that looks like human language, and whether that is a sign of artificial general intelligence. What I am interested in here is patterns of tool usage and the spreading of tools. There's a criticism out there of Moltbot, which points out that Moltbot isn't really anything because a human still decides at some point to include the prompt that says, essentially, read and post and comment, and a human has at some point made the decision as to how frequently that happens, and the first mover is always a human. I mean, you need to write or make the decision in the script that says every 4 hours, use the program that runs a program that will run the LLM agent that will use this prompt that will then do this thing. But I do think that there's a difference between late-night college nature of consciousness posting and fake reflection on interior state and a mechanism for describing and exchanging functionality. That whole mechanism, this Moltbot thing, that it happens to be human readable makes it more compelling because we're easily persuaded to pay more attention to things that look like and act like humans or have a consciousness, and that's a really irritating trait that we have these days. I mean, I really don't particularly care if this exchange of information results in some sort of hard takeoff in terms of consciousness by these bots, writing out predicted descriptions of what it might be like to be a thing that they have been told to be like. Again, what I'm interested in an explosion of capability due to these things. There's code that can modify itself. The modification happens continuously in a more or less unattended loop, and also there's occasional human direction. It's the modification and the unattended human loop part. The unattended loop part has been hilarious in a kind of mean way for a while because it's catching people out who have no idea how much they're spending on all of these LLM services in the first place. There's one person who posted on the vibe coding subreddit that they accidentally spent about $700 by not realizing that the vibe coded app they'd made was stuck in a loop and spending a bunch of money. I mean, oops. But that said, someone else pointed out that, hey, you've learned that now, and that $700 is still cheaper than a computer science degree. And while I may not be able to instantly agree that the person who lost the $700 learned anything particularly relevant in terms of software, I do have to agree that $700 is definitely less than what a computer science degree costs. So, I don't know. I digress. This entire thing with non-deterministic agents, where you can't be sure what's going to happen each time, has always felt a bit like Sorcerer Mickey and the mop and the unintended consequences. But the deal with that story is that Mickey really wanted to get some mopping done and was totally okay with the risk of, I don't know, drowning everyone until everyone started getting drowned. these agents are stupendously useful to people, and people are definitely getting a lot of value out of them. And they are horrifically insecure. The value and the lack of security and the risks come hand in hand. Like I've kept saying, to be most useful, they need to know what you know and to be able to do what you do. The whole deal with an agent is, if I may American high school essay myself, an agent is defined by the dictionary as a person who acts on behalf of another person or group. Like, it's literally a thing that is empowered to do things for you. And there have been some pretty shitty human agents. There are whole laws in England and Wales about the duties that agents owe to their clients. As soon as you let something act as or for you, there are risks. The deal with computing and software is that we think we can mitigate those risks. I mean, sure, we can. A bit. Maybe. But probably not as much as we want to, because the world is just too messy with too much ambiguity and need for flexibility. It will always, always be easier and faster and less hassle to just let something else do it. I want to come back to the part about an explosion of capability, and I guess it's another opportunity for me to do my scale is considered harmful bit. Nobody really writes an entire program anymore. All software is reliant upon other bits of software. You have to trust that those other bits of software do what they're supposed to do and don't, say, steal your credit card information or your AWS secrets or start mining crypto when all you wanted was, for fuck's sake, just a list of colors. So there's this problem that's become more apparent over the last couple of decades of supply chain security or supply chain attacks. Because of the internet, software also gets upgraded a lot more frequently. So if my software uses a bit of someone else's software, and then that software gets updated, but someone's put some naughty bits in it, and then my software automatically updates, now my software's got your software's naughty bits in it. Oh no! But you know what? Doing it this way was faster and easier than laboriously checking, or to just wait to see if any of the software I incorporated into my software went rogue. One of the benefits of open source software is that you can, well, see what it is that you're using. If you can read the code, then you have the opportunity to check it and audit it. And, you know, if you had the time to do that, most people don't. I mean, you could pay a third-party company to do an audit, sure, whatever, but then you'd be paying them to do it versus not paying them and not doing it. But ultimately, the whole deal is this. Do I trust this code to do what it's supposed to do? Trust comes down to so many factors, including provenance. How long has this project been around? What reputation do the people who contribute to the software have? How many other people are using it? Does it have a star rating? Doing all of that and more is work. Just look to see if it's got lots of stars and just use that one, yeah? It's bad enough when it's just humans pumping out code for me to check and to incorporate. But now there are agents pumping out code, not just for me to incorporate, but for my agent to incorporate as well. Agentic code has rapidly become a problem for open source projects because they're all getting a whole bunch of AI-coded submissions. To keep up quality, the humans managing that software project need to review them. I mean, they don't need to review them, they could just decide not to, but the good ones realize the importance of actually checking what those submissions do. And they are getting flooded. It is almost like a denial of service attack because the cost of submitting a pull request or any kind of change to some code is just like so low now. You get computer to do it. So, first, a risk with agents is that it's super easy to trick them or to get them to act maliciously. That's just there. You can just prompt them in a weird way and then they'll just do bad stuff. In this way, vibe coding isn't really a bad neologism because the prompt is code. It's just expressed in a less precise manner that is paradoxically also able to communicate intent better than your regular programming language. Anyway, the second risk with all these agents is that they get better the more that they can do, which means that you're back to your regular problem of reviewing code to make sure it does what it's supposed to do, and like I said before, doesn't steal all your stuff. So you've got your agent, there's more code for it to use, you've got to go check if that code that it's going to use, or something has got to check, if the code that it's going to use, those skills, actually do what they're supposed to do. We don't really have a good solution to that problem of does it do what it's supposed to do? Mainly because if you go down that route, you start getting to, well, can you tell if this program will stop or not when you run it? And then a bunch of mathematicians would like to have a word with you. The assumption then is that sure, code is going to try to steal your stuff. So you put that code in a box, a sandbox, to make sure it can't do anything too dangerous. This is a whole bunch of things that we've had to deal with web browsers over the past 20, 30 years. And now we're back to our original problem. An agent that isn't let out of its box or can only do a limited number of things with a limited amount of data is necessarily an agent of limited usefulness. Or, if I attempt to coin a law, it would be something like this. The utility of an agent is proportional to the square of the data and systems accessible to it, but the risk of that agent is proportional to at least, more than the square, so at least the cube. I honestly don't think that there's a neat technological solution to this. I think it's an outside the tech problem, one on a societal level, especially in a world like ours where there's no liability for defects in software. People will do the stupidest thing in the easiest way to get the most utility or use out of something until it hurts too much, and then they'll only pull back just a little bit. And the horror, or not, is that this complete YOLOing of how should we use agents is going to produce way more progress than a precautionary stance. What's even more galling is that the current industry players are, in effect, the precautionary stance, because even though they're doing stuff, they're still kind of doing it in a completely not irresponsible way. I mean, certainly less irresponsibly than what people are doing with OpenClaw and so on. People are so impatient for this stuff that they are willing to go, you know what, OpenAI is being too precious and cautious with all of my information. Why don't I just give it access to everything? Although, as I'm reading this out loud, I do think a thing that I've realized is I don't trust OpenAI, but I do trust random software. So there is a difference between trusting OpenAI, the corporation, and some open source software and letting that have access to whatever you want to give it to. But I think this says more about the world that we live in, that people are so desperate or so driven to benefit from this utility that they'll go to these lengths, like, hey, just use my computer thing. They're using them to negotiate buying a car because buying a car is really stressful. They're using them to research doctors because the entire ecosystem of healthcare is fucked up. They're using them to apply for jobs or to organize information because our computers have siloed information on purpose because of the companies that deal with that information, despite our computers being general purpose computing machines. I don't know, maybe the rush to irresponsibly give agents such free access is more of a symptom of how crushing and competitive life is. At least, though, these agents are automating that crushing shit. Like someone said, wasn't the point of all of this AI to automate the boring stuff and not to automate the fun creativity part? This one was a long one. I am sorry. You should, there'll be a link to the newsletter. You can subscribe to the newsletter. Please don't click like. There's no like to click. You can even support the newsletter or tell your friends. Apparently people also ask for reviews and things. So there you go. That was it. Bye.